Straw Dogs, 1971. Few films from the early 70s sparked as much debate or as much censorship as Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. Banned for years in the United Kingdom and labeled as morally corrupting by censors across Europe, it straddled the line between art film and raw exploitation. Dustin Hoffman plays David Sumner, a quiet American mathematician who moves with his British wife to a rural village in Cornwall. At first, the town seems quaint, but soon, tensions erupt, locals turn hostile, masculinity is challenged, and what begins as intimidation escalates into shocking violence. The film's central controversy centered around a home invasion scene involving implied assault, a moment that censors saw as morally ambiguous and deeply troubling. Combined with Peckinpah's unflinching style and themes of male aggression, it was enough to get the film banned outright in several countries. Peckinpah claimed he was exploring the dark core of human nature, the primal instincts that erupt when boundaries are pushed too far. "I made a film about violence to show how violent we really are," he said in defense. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Perhaps no title from the 1972nd exploitation boom is more infamous or more reviled than Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS. Banned in several countries including Norway and the UK, the film's shocking mix of sadism, sexuality, and Nazi imagery made it a lightning rod for controversy. Set in a pseudo-historical concentration camp, the film follows Ilsa, a brutal commandant played with icy conviction by Diane Thorne. Her character is modeled loosely and controversially on real-life war criminal Ilsa Koch. The plot follows a series of grotesque medical experiments, domination, and rebellion among the prisoners. Though produced independently and shot in just a few weeks on old Universal Studios backlots, the film struck a nerve. Critics called it morally bankrupt. Feminist scholars condemned its faux feminist revenge arc, and many countries refused to release it at all. Yet, despite or because of its notoriety, Ilsa spawned a series of sequels and became a touchstone in grindhouse lore. Thorne's performance, exaggerated and unflinching, became symbolic of exploitation cinema's extremes. Fight for Your Life, 1977. Fight for Your Life was so incendiary that it was banned outright in the United Kingdom and refused classification in several countries. A volatile mix of racial slurs, home invasion terror, and vigilante justice, this film pushed audiences far beyond the comfort zone of traditional exploitation. Directed by Robert A. Endelson, the story follows a gang of escaped convicts who take a black family hostage in their own home. What unfolds is a harrowing psychological power struggle rooted in hatred, humiliation, and ultimately, revenge. The film's violence isn't just physical, it's verbal, emotional, and deeply racial. Critics were divided. Some viewed it as a sharp indictment of racism and bigotry taken to their logical extremes. Others condemned it as gratuitous and exploitative. Either way, its racial slurs and unsettling scenes led to its ban in the UK for decades. William Sanderson, who plays the film's unrepentantly racist villain, later admitted that many theaters refused to show it not because of the violence, but because of the language. People just weren't ready to see themselves reflected that way, he said. The film's climax flips the script. The victimized family takes justice into their own hands, delivering one of the most brutal and cathartic finales of the decade. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's directorial debut didn't just challenge audiences, it traumatized them. The Last House on the Left was banned or heavily censored in countries like the UK, Australia, and Germany. Advertised with the now infamous tagline, "To avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie," it was a film that dared viewers to look away. Loosely inspired by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, the story follows two teenage girls who are kidnapped and brutally assaulted by a gang of criminals. After the ordeal, the attackers unknowingly seek refuge in one of the girls' homes, leading her parents to discover the truth and deliver their own form of savage retribution. The film's grainy, low-budget aesthetic only heightened its realism. Viewers weren't watching stylized violence, they were watching something that felt disturbingly close to home, Craven said. "We were trying to make a statement about violence, but we wanted it to hit you in the gut." That gut punch quality got the film pulled from theaters and VHS shelves for decades. The BBFC rejected it repeatedly until the early 2000s. In the US, its release was met with protests and edits. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. Also known under the alternate title They Call Her One Eye, Bo Arne Vibinius's Thriller, A Cruel Picture is often described as one of the most unrelentingly violent exploitation films of its time. Banned in several countries for its graphic depictions of mutilation and revenge, the film became a cult icon and an obvious influence on later grindhouse homages like Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. The film tells the story of Frigga, a young mute woman who is kidnapped, addicted to heroin, and forced into prostitution by a sadistic pimp. But this is not just a story of victimhood, it's one of transformation. Frigga, through secret weapons training and calculated patience, turns herself into an instrument of retribution. What made the film infamous wasn't just the violent revenge, though it is jarringly stylized and unflinching. It was the inclusion of explicit adult content spliced into scenes which pushed censors over the edge. The combination of hardcore sequences with brutal action made Thriller nearly impossible to classify. Sweden cut nearly 30 minutes from the original, and other countries banned it outright. Christina Lindberg, who plays Frigga with chilling detachment, became an underground icon of the exploitation era. Wearing an eye patch for most of the film, she embodied both vulnerability and menace. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. No film ignited as much visceral fury from critics and censors in the late 72nd as Mierzarki's I Spit on Your Grave. Initially titled Day of the Woman, it was banned in countries like Ireland, Norway, and Canada, while the British Board of Film Classification refused it outright for years. Even in the United States, it faced harsh edits and was frequently pulled from theaters due to protests. The plot is brutally simple. Jennifer Hills, a young writer from New York, retreats to a rural cabin to work on her novel. There, she's violently attacked by a group of local men and left for dead. But Jennifer survives, and what follows is one of the most notorious tales of revenge in cinema history. Zarki shot the film with a raw, almost documentary feel, stripping away any musical score during key scenes to heighten the realism and discomfort. The result was deeply polarizing. While some condemned the film as misogynistic and exploitative, others, including a growing feminist view over time, argued that its revenge arc gave Jennifer a unique form of narrative agency. The film's graphic nature led Roger Ebert to famously label it a vile bag of garbage, while defenders insisted it held up an unflinching mirror to the violence women endure and the silence they're expected to maintain afterward. Zarki, who claimed the idea was inspired by a real-life assault survivor he helped, always maintained the film was a condemnation, not an endorsement of violence. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. No conversation about banned exploitation films without mentioning Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom. Directed by Pier Paolo Pasolini, the film was based loosely on the notorious book by Marquis de Sade, but transformed into something far more politically explosive. Set during the last days of Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy, Salò follows four powerful men who kidnap a group of teenagers and subject them to systematic degradation and violence. What unfolds is not just physical brutality, but psychological dissection of power, control, and the corruption of ideology. The film includes scenes of torture, forced humiliation, and disturbing acts that tested and often shattered audience tolerance. Upon release, Salò was banned in Australia, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and several other countries. Even in Italy, it sparked outrage, censorship, and legal challenges. Pasolini, who had long used cinema as a critique of political power, said the film was a metaphor for the modern consumer society and its endless appetite for dehumanization. Critics and scholars remain divided. Some hail it as a masterpiece of political cinema, others dismiss it as unwatchable cruelty. Pasolini's murder shortly before the film's release only added to its mythos and controversy. Salò is not an exploitation film in the traditional grindhouse sense. It's slow, artful, and intellectually provocative. But its raw extremity, paired with high philosophical intent. The Gestapo's Last Orgy, 1977. Also known by its Italian title, L'ultima orgia del Third Reich. This controversial Nazi exploitation film by Cesare Cannavaro was one of the most extreme entries in the subgenre that came to be known as Nazi exploitation. Its disturbing mix of violence, warped ideology, and cruelty led to its outright banning in the United Kingdom, Australia, and several European nations. Set in a fictional Nazi death camp, the film centers around a female prisoner and the sadistic SS officer who oversees grotesque acts of degradation under the twisted belief that brutality affirms ideological strength. Scenes of ritualistic punishment, psychological manipulation, and acts that blur power, perversion, and war crimes earned it a reputation as one of the most depraved films of its kind. The BBFC refused classification altogether, calling the film repellent and devoid of merit. And even among exploitation fans, it was viewed as too extreme to defend. The film was shelved in many countries for decades, surviving only through bootlegs and underground distribution. Director Cesare Canavari claimed the film was an allegory about the corrupting nature of fascism and the blind obedience that allowed cruelty to flourish. But the line between artistic intent and shock value felt razor thin. Audiences and critics alike debated whether the film was a warning or simply a sensational provocation hiding behind historical horror.